what is a secular strategy for demand in the long term, right? Like, why would people want to use this 3, 4, 5 years out? And I think if people come to us and they have a kind of strategy for that, they've concretely solved the idea maze. Some of their customers come to us and they're like, hey, you got to talk to these people. That is probably like the best buy signal. But if you survive and you have like customers who rave about you, and it's just clear that there is like pent up demand and induced demand for this thing, that's like, I think, the best strategy, because that's like not abstract, it's like actually real. Because you can't do what other people do and retain a net. I think you always have to just be a little bit irrational, a little bit random with your time to actually get those like just insane points of view that actually might lead to something great. You know, the petrodollar in large part was a tool for kind of American dollar supremacy, and like that kind of instantiated the dollar as like the thing that we use for trade all around the world. But the next iteration of that, of course, is like money that is proven by power, by electricity, right? Kind of us moving into an age from where we had to like discover, rebuild the world in the 20th century to now when we're like modernizing.
Ani, thanks for joining me. You're a partner at Dragonfly Capital. It's one of the largest, most legit crypto VC firms out there. You've been there for a while. I want to ask this first question and put myself in the shoes of a crypto founder who would like to get on your radar, who's doing a raise. You know, how would they first get your attention? How would you recommend kind of the best way to get your attention? And then also, how does he win you over to his idea or his way of thinking, or her?
No, I mean, yeah, that's a good question. And also, thanks for having me. I mean, proof of coverage is probably one of the best crypto podcasts. So, excited to be here. But yeah, I think like when we meet new founders, I think the hardest part is just trying to figure out, especially in crypto, it's like how much demand really is there for this thing, right? And I think there's different models of thinking about that question. It could be like maybe in the short term, right? And I, don't want to name projects or things like that, but crypto companies, and so much of them, I think like they're playing to some meta that they think investors will like or whatever. But really what matters is like, what is a secular strategy for demand in the long term, right? Like, why would people want to use this 3, 4, 5 years out? And I think if people come to us and they have a kind of strategy for that, they've concretely solved the idea maze. Some of their customers come to us and they're like, hey, you got to talk to these people. That is probably like the best buy signal, I think, out there, where it's like, we can't live without this thing. And like, it's just kind of a shame that in crypto, it's like so rare to hear people talk about like that. It's like core infra, right? As you would know, right? You know how hard it is to like build a project in the space. It's so competitive. But if you survive and you have like customers who rave about you, and it's just clear that there is like pent up demand and induced demand for this thing, that's like, I think, the best strategy, because that's like not abstract, it's like actually real. And proving that out, I think, is quite hard. But once you do, like, I think people are good to go.
Makes sense. And how do you typically prefer founders to get in touch with you? Is it Twitter, Telegram, warm intro?
Yeah, I mean, I would look at everything, and I think it's quite crazy that a lot of people kind of segment themselves to only like one modality. So we try to use everything. I think at Dragonfly, like, people hit us up in like every sort of manner, which is great. Like, sometimes it's LinkedIn, email. But yeah, typically I would say warm intro is always best as to like why this founder or something. It's always good, I think, to have like some skin in the game. And the warm intro is also just like people putting their social capital up, right? As like a kind of form factor as to like, why do you really like this company, this project? And people's thinking behind that almost elucidates a lot about like themselves as well. It also tells you like who you want to work with, what is kind of their strategy with this, right? And like, too often it might be like they, maybe there's like some deal between that person or the founder or something, and we try to stay away from that, right? Like, we sort of just want to back projects very high integrity, positive sum for the space. I think very foundational. And yeah, I mean, we'll see how the next few years go, but I mean, it's sort of just like we are entering, I think, a new phase of like this kind of rampant exploration for crypto, right? Like, where can crypto economics, I think, really just move the space forward?
Yeah, no, 100%. And then on the flip side of that question, like, how do you structure your day or your week in terms of just workload, setting up your personal process, talking to founders versus helping portfolio companies versus anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do a lot of the same stuff that other people do. I mean, I really just try to carve out a bunch of the time in the day, outside of the regular stuff, right? Like talking to founders, meetings, internal stuff, to just learn as much as I can, whether that's like reading, I'm an avid reader, books or otherwise, or just like talking to new people in the space. I mean, I think like there's that line in investing, right? Which is like, three dots don't always make a line. But I think when you do what we do long enough, you start to see correlations where they don't exist. And that can be a big mistake, right? Because you might draw something out in the future or underwrite something that just like wasn't true. It's like, that line. It's not what you know that gets you. It's not what you don't know that gets you. It's what you know that just ain't so. And you see that in investing a lot, right? Where it's, oh, I need to re-underwrite, I think, this approach or something like that. So try to learn a lot, talk to new people. Um, yeah, I mean, outside of the usual, I think so much of this game, I remember Tom, my colleague, was asked a similar question. He was like, founders should sleep more. And like, that's something I think I've been incorporating a lot, or try to at least, of like, how do you make sure that you can do that? Because this, like, crypto itself is unique in the sense that it just is fully global and 24/7. And I mean, we as a firm, I think, like, we have an office in New York, one in Singapore. The team is sort of everywhere. We're investing everywhere. And so it really is a marathon, not a sprint. And I think, like, a lot of people should probably be thinking about how to take the best care of themselves and all of that so they can play the marathon.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I mean, a couple of things there. One, I'm a big advocate of sleep as well. I've been roasted by friends before for like trying to get sleep on vacation, and even if we have a late night, like I'll sleep in, and I think it's just the best way to preserve your health in terms of longevity, but also just like short term day to day performance. Like even if I'm not working, I'm just like living on a weekend or something. Like I want my thoughts and emotions and everything to be like as regulated and as positive kind of sum as possible. So I definitely,
You actually nailed something. You actually just brought up something that I think, like, I try to do as well, which is like, yeah, I was having a conversation recently about, like, the problems of being maybe too rational with your day to day, and people like try to plan every single thing. But for what we do, it's like naturally serendipitous, right? I think when you're investing, so much of the great part about the job and the journey is like the first meeting. It's the sourcing, it's the introduction. It's like the random kind of perchance, whatever, you're at a coffee shop or something or at a bar, and someone tells you about their idea and you see that like glimmer in their eye, right? And I want to make sure I get as much of that as possible because you can't do what other people do and retain an edge. I think you always have to just be a little bit irrational, a little bit random with your time to actually get those like just insane points of view that actually might lead to something great, right? Like, uh, I try to leave enough time, I think, for the power law to naturally occur. Like the power law in my daily life of like one random meeting can change your life.
100%. Yeah. And also, creativity comes from the subconscious mind. You can't really think your way to creativity. So if you're always just kind of executing tasks and in a to do list kind of mindset, you don't really leave room for connecting the dots that you might otherwise. But that brings up something you said earlier about like what you do differently. I feel like a lot of investors do see three dots and they try to make a line, and then and those three dots become a line, 7 out of 10 times, and then it's okay. Like there's this heuristic here that I can use to pattern match things and save myself mental energy and time, and then I can predict things in a way that's predictive. But you go far enough down that path, and then it's like, how do you differentiate as a investor? It's like actually being able to undo that pattern matching heuristic and be like, well, I've seen this work 7 out of 10 times, but it won't work this time because of X, Y, or Z. Like not being married to the pattern matching heuristic.
Right. And that probably applies, I think you're right there. And I think that applies very heavily to deepen vis-a-vis all these other sectors because people have been jarred by like some of these ideas in the past, right? Like you have sort of the history of crypto being like 2017, 2018. We had like more real L1 infra being built, but at the same time, you remember like the IoT craze, the supply chain craze, and like all of these things. And that was fully globalized. Like it happened both in the Chinese crypto market and then obviously in the West. But people invest in those things, basically all got burned. And now as we start to revisit the same ideas again, people still have the same mental models, right? So I think like you have to let the scar tissue not really affect you. I think there's like a lot of we talk about this internally a lot, like, just because it may not have happened first, data points change, people change, times change, right? Like I really like this line from Mark Andreessen, I think it was like a decade ago, but he's like basically everything in the future is going to work. Like, Webvan was this huge kind of colossal failure, I think, in the early 2000s, pets.com and all those things. Now we basically have all of that, right? Like, it's just a matter of duration. It's not a matter of like, will it happen or will it won't? But it's our time. And, it's like being early is the same as being wrong in many cases, but I think you have to just constantly be iterating, right? Like wondering why is this time different? Maybe it is. Who knows, right? You have to like kind of move past failures.
100%. Yeah. I mean, speaking of deepen, you talked about investing at the frontier before in terms of what you like to look at. I definitely consider deepen the frontier of frontiers in a lot of ways. It's like kind of the bleeding edge of hardware, blockchain technology, just technology in general, incentive and human coordination systems. And it's the kind of the frontier, the bleeding edge of all of those. So I'm curious, like, what your first impression of DePIN was and how it's changed as the sector has evolved over the last 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious about this on your end too, but like, I think when I first started hearing about the idea, it didn't, I think, fully make sense to me how these things would work in modern times with just tons of regulation. I mean, this was like a few years ago, right? Like maybe 3 to 4 years ago when I first started hearing people talk about like, oh, maybe we should kind of revisit some of these ideas again. Um, but I was like, oh, tons of regulation, super hard to pull off. You're going up against like the, greatest companies of all time, like Fang et al, even a bunch in commodities that have like such streamlined processes, such brilliant people that have like optimized like everything under the sun. And that's kind of what I think to a lot of people. It sounds like on first glance, like, oh, you're gonna take down a hyperscaler, or you're gonna do this thing, or you're doing something that Amazon is doing. But all great companies start small, and I think like people sort of forget that where it's like you kind of eat the elephant as a whole, but one bite at a time, and that one bite could be like, oh, one part of this process, and then you move from there, right? And so, I mean, I think probably for everyone, we saw this first with like wireless, just like the kind of takeoff velocity of wireless in general was like, oh my God, maybe something could actually happen here, right? And for so long, I think this part of crypto has been derided because, yeah, rightfully so. It's like what was sort of happening for the last decade, right? I mean, a lot of the growth in crypto was driven by sort of evading regulatory structures around finance, um, and actually kind of thinking about block space as a fundamental commodity really outside of a lot of those things that stable is kind of in the first category, but in the second category there just like wasn't that much, right? And I think now seeing that stuff, it's quite funny. A lot of people like don't want to believe it, and so I have conversations with these people who are like, oh, it's going to like come crashing down eventually or whatever. But if you look at like what's actually going on and you talk to people in these certain communities, you're like, it reminds me a lot of like early ETH, early Bitcoin, of people who have just made it their identity. And I think this goes back to where we are as a society of just like what we buy, purchase, use says a lot about us. And so people have gotten very particular about the hardware that they have, the software that they use, and it's part of their ideology. And so it becomes like very sacred, I think, to them.
Yeah, there's definitely a budding DePIN cult religion that's
What
forming.
about you? What did you think back in the day? I guess
Yeah, I was pretty enthralled, pretty hooked from day one. I mean, I have an interesting entryway into crypto in the sense that it really was through Deep and it was through Helium. It wasn't through Bitcoin or ETH or NFTs or anything else back in 2020. It was I'd heard of those things before. I didn't get them because I didn't have a technical software background. I had a finance background, so I never really understood them. But I heard about Helium and it was just very tangible. I could understand setting up what looked like a Wi-Fi hotspot to create what seemed like Wi-Fi connectivity. It was actually, IoT lower bandwidth connectivity, but the idea was the same, right? This box produces wireless connectivity for devices, and I could see how that was valuable to the world. And I could also see why I would be incentivized to set that up because I'm being paid tokens that have financial value. And so the whole system made a lot of sense to me. Shout out the Helium marketing team for making things very kind of normie friendly and just very simple. And the onboarding process was smooth and the app was great. It's just a very easy, quick, painless process. And I think DePIN is unique in the sense that you can earn your first crypto. You don't always have to buy it. And that was just a very big unlock for me. And I was hooked just immediately from day one. So
yeah, that's something we underrate, I think, in the space where like people touching and feeling a product is so important. But in most of crypto, it's like largely unusable, right? You have to learn so much before you want to use a L2, some L1s, like to put money in DeFi. It's actually just quite cumbersome. And a product where people can just appreciate, I think the aesthetic nature is something the space has lacked until like now, where like people can actually like buy the stuff and use it. I think also as technology just gets like easier to make and more commodified, especially around the hardware layer, like regular people can just like do this at home. You don't like we're almost moving away from like I think the OG Apple philosophy of like this is all done in some like factory somewhere in Asia and you just like buy this thing and use it, right? And that makes people I think focus basically entirely on the software, but now it's like 3D printing is everywhere. Like we're 3D printing homes and all of these things, and like the cost of that just dropped all these other things, right? We're 3D printing everything from rockets to homes, and as that I think enters the house and domestic life in a way that hasn't been before, people just like tinker, and we're back to like the homebrew, that made all these great tech companies.
100%. Yeah, just do what you can to drop the costs of production and tinkering and trying things, and you can get some really cool outcomes. But I've heard you talk about electrodollars and petrodollars both on this podcast before and some others. So I'm curious if you could expand on the idea of maybe basically commodity currencies and also just how they play into DePIN and what sectors within DePIN you're most bullish on. I would assume those are related to energy and of oil production. Curious your take there.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great topic as well because we don't have energy investments. Like this is just like sort of an abstract idea, I think. But like, the petrodollar in large part was a tool for kind of American dollar supremacy, and like that kind of instantiated the dollar as like the thing that we use for trade all around the world. But the next iteration of that, of course, is like money that is proven by power, by electricity, right? Kind of us moving into an age from where we had to like discover kind of rebuild the world in the 20th century to now when we're like modernizing it, right? And I think people forget it took like 40 or 50 years for electricity to be even somewhat pervasive in America. And now we kind of generally accept it as a thing. But the next iteration of that will be something like this of like, okay, our money is getting upgraded, AI will be everywhere. What does a world like that look like? And I think it's like a similar dramatic shift to like electricity taking over the Midwest, where people would spend most of their day doing, very kind of cumbersome chores, but then they could like focus on the mind and they could focus on consumption and things that like actually make their lives better. And we're entering a similar phase again. And this is sort of currency that you can't jigger with, right? And so maybe it's like all the political ramifications that have happened in the past 20 or something years or even before is quite simply because like people realized that a lot of what they were doing were these like really complex financial games on things that like 2008 as one example, right, where things had gone so complicated that the average person couldn't understand how we got here. And since then you've had this like kind of Manichaean battle, but now I think, yeah, potentially crypto is a salve for a lot of that, where it makes a lot of sense. People interact with it. It's very transparent. You can see what's going on. And I think that directly led to a lot of the stable coin adoption, especially in the West. In the East, it makes a lot more sense why people use stables, right? It's like you have something on the order of like 57 plus countries experiencing hyperinflation. So like for them, anything like outside of the currency to store their assets is actually good. But in the West, it's like, oh, I can just transparently see what's going on here, right, with many of these stables. But no, I think how it interacts with DePIN in general is, yeah, like the biggest story of our time is probably like how do we get clean, cheap energy to people? And I studied like economics, math, and like one of the things I would look at was just like the correlation between energy consumption and wealth. And we somehow like people still believe this degrowth idea of like, oh, if we consume less, we can still go to a Star Trek future. And I'm just vehemently opposed to that. And like I think we have the ability to produce more, make more, be positive sum, right, in a Pareto optimal way that's not affecting anyone else. And I think the only way to do that is like cheaper, more abundant energy. And that I think has downstream applications for compute storage bandwidth as well, right? The cheaper the energy gets, the more we can just make stuff and make everything great.
For sure. Yeah, it's insane to think that we can create and harness less energy to progress on a technological level faster. Like that's what the Kardashev scale is about, right? Is like we measure different galaxies or universes in terms of how far along they are technologically by how much energy they can harness. And because just because that's what will power all the tech that they have and the way that they'll get in between solar systems and everything else.
But let me ask you about that. I guess I'm curious on your take with a lot of the decentralized energy stuff. We've taken a look at a lot of these things, but I guess I was just much more curious like how the company building process and stuff might look like, and what do the future of a lot of these things look like. But yeah, curious on your take.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I fully realize that energy is one of the largest markets in the world along with wireless, right? So there's definitely a big opportunity there. To me, it feels like energy deepens are a sector behind the wireless deepens just because they literally got started a cycle later, right? So they're going through all the growing pains of like it's build a community, launch a token, all of the crypto native stuff. I feel like they're definitely a cycle behind on. And then, I mean, I just know more about wireless than energy for sure from like a Web2 perspective, but it seems like there were definitely some pretty key both regulatory and technological tailwinds in the wireless space that allowed Helium and some of the others, XNet, to do what they've done, specifically like CBRS spectrum deregulation, the idea that anyone can buy a radio and set it up, and it's not just a Wi-Fi hotspot, it's also like a mini cell tower. Having access to that spectrum as an everyday person on the supply side, I think is pretty powerful. And then that's on the regulatory side. And then the technological side, just the advent of eSIMs and how much that can increase customer churn and customer choice from like an MNO kind of MVNO perspective. Like instead of having a physical SIM card in your phone that's like locked to a carrier and you have to go into the store and have it switched out, it's just such a hassle and process. If you can scan a QR code and in maybe 2 minutes completely switch your phone's carrier, like that's really powerful. And I think it allows you to have multiple carriers on your phone at once, which then opens the door to having Helium as your first or second phone carrier option, which I have them as my first carrier option and only actually because they have a partnership with T-Mobile. And so when I'm not in range of a Helium hotspot, I have T-Mobile coverage and it literally works perfectly fine. And it's $5 a month for unlimited data. That's a grandfathered rate. Now it's 20, but still. So yeah, maybe it's just because I don't know as much about energy as wireless, but like those technological regulatory things, I haven't really seen as much in the energy space. And I almost feel like energy might even be more regulated than telecom.
Yeah,
Like,
that's actually my question with a lot of this, where it's like at least in I guess the other aspects of DePIN, they like directly interface with the consumer, and you can like you like they own the customer relationship, right? With some like I mean, Helium in some capacity, like you're actually buying like hardware from them, so they have that part of the customer relationship. But with energy, what does that look like, right? Like I think the max many people have experience with energy is like the Tesla battery, Tesla charging, maybe, or like but other than that, it's you turn the switch on and like they pay a bill, right? But they're not like really have this brand affinity with whoever's giving them energy.
yeah, I guess a better way to put it would be people today can set up Wi-Fi hotspots and even set up, cellular radios that provide signal and coverage to other people and other businesses. That can happen today. That can't happen in the energy market in the sense that you can't really just like set up your own transmission lines for energy. If I have solar panels on my roof, great. I can use that energy. I can store it in a battery. I can, charge my Tesla with it. But I'm not stringing wires to my neighbor's house. And and even if I could, like you'd have to string wires to like your whole neighborhood, right? Whereas like with wireless connectivity, you can kind of just, I mean, you can do fiber or you can beam it. So yeah, the analogy of like I can do something productive for a DePIN network that exists in wireless, I don't think exists in energy today. And maybe it's a technological thing. Maybe it's also definitely a regulatory thing. Like I know Jason at Daylight has said that there's actually laws around transmission and putting up your own transmission because otherwise like the streets would look extremely crowded with all these wires going everywhere because people would do that. And there's actually laws against it. And he showed me a picture on Twitter of like a street in some emerging, market country. And it was just crowded with wires. And I was like, that's not what we want our streets to look like. So that's kind of my take on energy versus wireless. Is like I feel like it's probably a sector cycle behind, but I do think it's very promising. It's a huge market. There's a lot of really badass founders that have emerged in that space, like Jason and David and a few others. So I'm excited to see kind of what they build. But it's like got to even get to the token launch part or get to the supply side kind of launch part first, anyways.
Yeah, no, fully agree with that. I think yeah, how people begin to scale is kind of what we're looking at, and how does it become like more of a venture style business, I think, where right now a lot of the processes are very manual, right? But you have to kind of pick your spots and figure out like where can technology really just accelerate this business, like cut costs, like make it something that like people can't get away from, right? And that's often the hard part of like you have such limited time, such limited resources, but you need to figure out like, okay, like we can dominate here and that will sort of scale up after that, right? And in these like very regulated markets, it's hard to know where to do that in. But I guess yeah. On my question to you there would also be like, of the things you think stopping a lot of progress in DePIN. I guess as somebody who's been entering the space and I've been talking to a lot of founders. Obviously, I guess I'm curious on like how you view sort of the roadblocks now. Like, what are some of the big roadblocks in your mind that you see like stopping a lot of DePIN advancement?
For sure. I think one roadblock that's hopefully mostly removed at this point, but the whole you need to buy our token to use our network to spend it, I think is just antiquated and ridiculous. And I think I had thought that most founders had figured out a way to like, accept fiat or credit cards and then just kind of burn the tokens on the back end. A lot of large DePINs have done that, but I talked to a really probably like a top 50 by market cap DePIN founder today, and he was like, "Oh, we just enabled that. And what did he say? He said basically like the conversion rate from setting up a configuration of GPUs to actually spending on the network went from 0.75% to like 50% because it's the same as like if you have a Shopify like checkout page and like the checkout flow is just completely fucked. No one's going to convert even if you get a lot of people on that page. It's the same thing with the DePINs and GPUs, except the checkout here is like, actually spending on the network. So I think, yeah, I mean, just that's like the low hanging fruit is just allow people to spend in whatever currency they want, including credit cards. Um,
Yeah, like take the best of what other people have figured out in technology, right? Like we're still not taking my big lesson, yeah, for a lot of deep founders would just be like take the best of what people have done in Web 2, apply that to your product, and then go from there. But we're spending just tons of time reinventing the wheel like 9 different ways.
and the cool thing is now it's been long enough in DeepIn, it's been 4 or 5 years to where it's like you can take the best of what Web 2 founders have done and the best of what DeepIn founders have done. And they're starting to become a playbook for what are the basics that like I probably won't differ from as a founder versus like, well, like these things aren't proven out yet. I might go a different way here. Um,
I mean, that one thing that's exciting there for me is like, we've spoken about, I guess, the medallion system that I know both Dawn and Daylight are working on. And so for, I guess, listeners, it's like how, if I wanted to trade, say, like lower Manhattan bandwidth or energy, the medallion system creates like this almost geographic proximity for people to get exposure to that type of asset commodity in that place, right? So you're almost localizing the commodity supply and demand versus like, right now it's like general bandwidth, right? But you know that's like somewhat wrong because bandwidth in Wisconsin is very different than bandwidth in Shanghai and bandwidth in New York, right? Like those prices like should not be basically the same. And maybe there's a way to arb all that a lot of that stuff, right? But that's like a very I feel like uniquely deep in concept of like, okay, assuming it is a geographical thing, like how do we come up with a way for investors to get exposure and someone to take the opposite side? So like that's I guess one of the interesting technical advancements we've sort of made in a composable way that should be coming out shortly.
no, 100%. I'm scrolling back on my Twitter right now, and like I think I tweet too much because it's taking a while. But there, there was a founder who was basically like fudding deep in a bit and saying that, or an investor that was fudding deep in a bit and saying that like you don't want to just dump all this supply of tokens on the market to create this like global incentive system, and then everyone's just going to sell your token off as you slowly build out demand. I was like, it doesn't have to work that way. You can have demand led opening of markets on the supply side, and a couple of deepins have already started to do that, like Hive Mapper specifically. So you don't need to blow your whole load like token supply wise, like so to speak. Initially, you can do it like as you get demand on the network over time. Spexy, the drone mapping deepin's doing that as well. Not even allowing like drone operators to sign up unless like there's like a paid contract in that area, and then say, okay, now we'll onboard them. So
No, I think both of those are great projects, right? And I think we have to you have to pay homage somewhat to the original pioneers of a lot of the space where like we're sort of in the jungle just figuring things out, and it's an incredibly hard process because the crypto markets are not exactly forgiving, right? When you make even minute errors, and so it's like you're in the dark forest, you're waiting around, and you like step in the mud, and then suddenly it's like game over, right? But I think we're getting to a time now where actually things being composable makes it all a positive sum. Like you want Helium, Spexy, High Mapper all to win, right? Because it's like fundamentally us against the world. And I think that's sort of our ethos as a firm where it's like just supporting builders. Like we have no idea what the future is going to look like. All you have to do is make sure you're ready for the crazy future, right? And I think anything we can do there to help people is like what's important to us. And there's been so many times that just like we have never known where things are going to go, but when you find that energy, you just want to make sure you're like the gum on the founder's shoe, right? And you're just there and you're helping, and like yeah, you may be annoying at times, but like so be it, right? Like nothing great is just like a clean lineup or just a simple J curve. It's like just a jagged edge of ups and downs constantly, right? But I mean I guess that's the fun of it, but like we're always trying to figure out like who can actually work together, where can we just make something happen, right? And I think VCs exist as this transmission mechanism between founders and the market, but then against all these other agents, right? Against policymakers, against potential customers, and all of those things. And if you combine all those right elements, I think into the potion, you get this like incredible alchemical mix that you haven't seen before.
100%. Yeah, last question, then I want to wrap us. But if you guys missed it at the beginning of the pod, Ani's in the Dominican Republic right now at a Praxis pop up. I know you invested in them, angel invested in them, and I'm a fellow Praxian. I'm a citizen as well. I have my Steel visa. I think it's called. So I haven't really been keeping up with the project. Just give me a super high level, what are they trying to build? And then also what are the latest kind of updates? Because I've seen a big financing round, I've seen a bunch of blog posts come out, and you're there on the ground. So would love to hear just what's been up with Praxis.
Yeah, I mean, I think many years ago, even before the practice stuff, I was always, I guess, deeply interested in new ways of living because I grew up in the Bay Area, and like there, it just suddenly became it was like wearing a straitjacket if you wanted to do something out of the ordinary, which I thought was just very weird, right? Because it's like the place where all this great catalyzation of technology and progress came from, but then at some point people just gave up and they were like, okay, we have our tech companies and that's about it, right? And so a lot of it came down to me on like what are sort of the innovations we can make around law policy. What would programmable law look like where you can just sort of adapt on the regulatory front. And I was very briefly at Pronomos, and so we were the kind of venture fund investing in new cities, and we would go around and talk to all these people, but it sort of became unclear how they would generate demand. Like, why would you live in like the northern part of Scandinavia because they had an airport? And that's some of the stuff that founders would say to us. They're like, "Oh, we have all the supply, and so demand will just come." But like, that's not how cities kind of work, right? You need like people to want to break the lease, and yeah, me personally, way before Dragonfly as well, like I met Dryden and the team, and it just became clear like they actually had a reasonable way of having people break the lease, and a lot of it just comes down to like, yeah, if you share values with people that you want to live with, and you're working together towards something that's interesting, then maybe we can make something great happen. And I don't know what company formation will look like in the future. I just know it's not going to look like the past, right? With you have all these kind of advancements in AI that make it possible to generate huge outcomes with far fewer employees. And so that will change everything. Maybe you need far less VC dollars to make that happen. But all I know is like the past is not indicative of the future when it comes to like making a startup, right? But what you can do, I think, to like get a better sense of where things are going, is just like be around interesting people, right? Be around, I guess, people that have like at least an idea for the future, because both extreme optimism and extreme pessimism just leads to the same outcome, which is like do nothing. And so you want to be with people who have like yeah, with like a measured kind of view of like, okay, this is what the future can look like. This is the idea maze. This is how we like create an accurate shot on goal, I think. And that's what I was saying, saying earlier about like, how do you have like measured serendipity in your life where some randomness leads you to the right outcome, right? And I think by necessarily always being too rational, you sort of forget that side. And you can go, completely the wrong way sometimes.
100%. Well, my man, thank you for coming on. This was a great episode. Excited.